Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ask Chuck Dixon number 38. This is a special Boxing Day edition, a little extra for all of you. Let's get this ridiculous sleigh bell music off. Okay, it's Boxing Day. It's the day after Christmas, and I thought I'd give a little Christmas present of my own to all of you loyal listeners and viewers and answer a few more questions, take a few more questions out from under the tree. And where do you send these questions to ask Chuck Dixon? That's me. Um, you can ask me just below this video that you're watching right now in the comments section. You can see me on Facebook, or the most direct route is send your questions to brunobookstore@gmail.com, and I will get to them. So I'm going to answer a bunch of your questions and a little extra at the end of the video. Okay, Ben Baker says, when working, do you focus on one project at a time until it's completed, jump from project to project as the mood takes you, or carefully divide your time amongst a number of ongoing projects? Um, Basically, I keep a loose schedule in my head. If I promise someone I'll have something to them at a certain time, like the end of the first week of next month, I'll actually put that on a calendar. But otherwise, I work so far ahead of schedule that I've got a lot of free. I have a lot of freedom to work on, you know, what I feel like working on or what I'm making the most progress on. So comics, I usually work beginning to end. I never walk away from a comic script till it's finished. So I start on page one and I'm not done till the final page. If I'm really on a roll, I'll even move on to the next issue and just keep on going. Um, Almost well, everything I do now is miniseries. Everything I do now is aimed toward trade paperbacks. So there's a finite end. I'm not working on anything ongoing. Like a forever book, like I used to work on, where I'd be on a book for 80 issues, 100 issues. That doesn't happen anymore for most writers. It hasn't happened for me in a while. So, a lot of times I'm looking to close out a miniseries. It has a finite end. So, I keep a rough idea in my head of where I am. And of course, I see pencils all the time getting emailed to me as the project moves on. So I know always know where the penciler is. And my real deadline, the real deadline for a comics writer is to stay ahead of your penciler. That's the real deadline. And I like to stay well ahead of my penciler, at least an issue or two. Back in the day when I was on, ongoing monthly periodicals, I would be 6, 7, 8 months ahead of my pencilers um, because, I like that freedom in my schedule. And then, in between comics work, I work on novels. Um, the novels are something I can't write straight through. I can't do that. I can't go beginning to end on a novel. I kind of chip away at them. I usually get off to a fast start, write 5 or 6 chapters, and I'm well into the book. And then it's a matter of chipping away, thinking about it, letting it marinate in my mind, which I don't have to do with comics because comics are a more natural fit for me than prose. But prose is harder work. I enjoy it. It's really challenging for me, but it's harder work than comics, and obviously it's longer. There's more of an investment in time. I usually take a couple 3 months to write a novel with comic work in between novel writing sessions. So yeah, I sort of go where my whim takes me, and because I know how to use a calendar, I'm allowed to do that. I allow myself that time. It's all about scheduling. Okay. Another Ben Baker question. He's asked some great questions. You've written for comics and traditional books, and Vox mentioned on a video that you were working on scripts for movies. Have you written for radio, audiobooks, computer games, tabletop RPG games, TV shows, etc.? Are there any of those you'd like to try but haven't had the chance? Are there any you tried and hated? Um, yeah, I've written for video games, mostly. Yeah. I didn't enjoy the experience because it really is like machine work. One video game, I worked on a mobile game platform for a while, And the people I was working with didn't seem to understand story at all. Um, and, you know, they had a basic storyline for their game, and it was devoid of character development, suspense, and humor, which are the three things I think are important in any kind of escapist fiction, even if it's just a game. And plus, the gameplay was boring. And the people that owned the company sunk millions into this mobile game, and they must have ultimately agreed with me because they pulled the plug on it. And I think it previewed in beta in the Netherlands, and that's the only time the public ever got to see it. And then it vanished from their phones instantly. The only other video game work I did, I worked on an aborted um, Batman game, providing dialogue, and I wasn't allowed to provide dialogue for any of the principals. Other writers had done that. I don't know who they were. I ended up writing lots and lots of lines for goons and henchmen. And there's just so many variations of "look out, I think I saw him." So it really strained my abilities uh, as a dialogue writer to write um, literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lines of dialogue uh, that I don't like writing on the nose dialogue, but they kind of had to be, right on the nose dialogue, like, "Oh, I'm so angry," and come up with a variation on that would sound interesting coming out of an actor's mouth. More fun was an Expendables game I worked on, because the actual actors from the movie got to read the lines, and I was a lot more conversant with those voices because I'd written a prequel comic book series, and I got to talk to Stallone a lot about the movie series. So I was real conversant with how those characters talked, their shared patois, and that was a lot of fun to write, actually. And I got to write entire, complete dialogue sequences. And from what Sly told me, that the guys were cracking up at some of the stuff I wrote. I hope they were cracking up at the stuff that was intentionally funny, but he didn't specify. So that was my foray into video games. I really didn't do anything else there. As far as writing screenplays, I've never had an interest. I'm a comic book writer, and it's really the only thing I ever wanted to do was write comic books, and I got to do it. I got to do a lot of it, so I'm a very lucky guy that my life's dream came true. But that's all I really ever wanted to do was write comic books. I love movies, but I find the screenplay format constraining. It's not a good fit for me. I don't do my best work in it. I have written some screenplay stuff, and it was painful. I wrote some web content. It was for a proposed animated series, CGI animated series for Lionsgate. It didn't go anywhere, but I wrote 2 episodes. And it wasn't my best work because of the format. I couldn't get used to it. And yes, I did. I did do some writing for Vox on a screenplay. Um, and you know, again, the movie format's more constraining than comics because someone remarked after I wrote my scenes, primarily they were action scenes. Someone in production remarked that that if myself and Michael Bay ever got to make a movie together, we would bankrupt Hollywood. So, uh, and I don't enjoy the format. In fact, I've been on many conference calls with Hollywood people about different things, and I can create silence across 4 continents with the words, "I don't want to write the screenplay." And I've said that many times. Many times I've been offered a chance to write screenplays, and I said, "I'll write your movie treatment. I like writing movie treatments. I'll write the treatment. I don't have any interest in writing the screenplay." And it's a waste of time and money because you're going to get somebody to rewrite it anyway. And you'll probably pay them a whole lot more than you would have paid me. So just, let me do the treatment, pay me for that, which is, always better money than comics. So I would have been well rewarded. And I've written a number of movie treatments. which I kind of like. As far as writing for TV, no, because TV, yeah, that's from my understanding is it's a harsh environment, and they just sort of leave you for dead eventually. And I really don't want to. I don't like the whole Hollywood writing experience, mostly because you're dealing with producers who think they're great storytellers and have great ideas, and almost all the time neither is true. I enjoy working with other writers, and I enjoy working with talent who can write. Particularly, my experiences with Sylvester Stallone have been terrific. The guy knows story like nobody's business. I love talking to him about building story and characters and things like that. Um, when we each speak, we together we end up completing each other's sentences or talking in a kind of shorthand because we're in a genre we both get, action stories. So yeah, but TV writing, that's definitely never attracted me. That's a dog eat dog environment from everything I understand, and I don't like that. I like sitting here talking to you, or sitting here just making stuff up on my own with no pressure. All right, next question. Travis L.D. Murphy. Are there any uncollected comic books you've written that you'd like to see reprinted in trade paperbacks? If so, which ones? Well, Way of the Rat comes to mind because it's had a few trade paperbacks, which are almost impossible to find. But I would like to see an oversized omnibus collection of the entire 24 issue run because the artwork was absolutely gorgeous. Jeff Johnson, followed by we had fill-ins by Luke Ross, and just some great stuff. Sal Valuto came along for a miniseries. It was a lot of fun to work on, and just as you can see, richly illustrated, and it had everything I like in a story. It had action, it had suspense, it had humor, as I mentioned earlier. And I think it's worthy. It's one of the CrossGen produced some amazing books, but this is one of the more successful, I think, from a whole package creative point of view. And I'd love to see it get a decent collection somewhere. If anybody at Marvel's listening, if there's anybody at Marvel anymore, please think about this one. Another one I'd like to see collected is my run on Green Arrow, if only because Rodolfo DiMaggio's artwork was so amazing. And we go from Jim Apparo's incredible work closing out, his run on the series and right into Rodolfo DiMaggio. And it's just fantastic stuff and deserves to be seen by a wider audience than, the 50-cent bins. And, he moved on basically from this series shortly after finishing up with me on Green Arrow. He went off to Hollywood to become a production artist on almost every action film you've watched in the last 20 years. So, but he really deserves to be seen, and his fantastic artwork and the excellent inking by Robert Campanella. Boy, who was our colorist? Was it Lee Lowridge? I think was our colorist. It's just gorgeous work. Aside from my writing, I would just like to have a big, fat, oversized volume of it sitting on my shelf for me to admire. Same thing for my Tex Willer work. I've only written 3 Tex Willer stories for Benelli, the Italian publisher. And this was a long time dream of mine, was to write Tex Willer. Tex Willer is the greatest Western comic book ever created, with a 75-year plus history. Some of the greatest artists in the history of comics have worked on this title, and I was lucky enough to get to write 3 stories, and I'd love to see them translated into English and presented here in the United States. So there you go. Those are the 3 things I think I would most like to see collected in worthy editions. Okay, Nick Weimer. Out of the Batman bullpen, who was the biggest card shark? Yeah, after hours at the bat summits, we would uh, play a little poker, which was always Denny O'Neill's idea. And he introduced us to Texas Hold'em, which I had never played. So what an addictive game that is. And here we see one of the games depicted in an issue of Detective Comics by Graham Nolan. He's over there on the left, and inked by Scott Hanna, who's all the way over there on the right with the ponytail. And that's me next to Graham. And there's Denny in his ass-kicking hat, which he always wore to the summits, his fedora, and Archie Goodwin. And, we would play after hours. And Graham decided to stick it into a story with all of our likenesses, which was fun. But the problem is, he left out the card shark. He left out the mechanic. He left out the sharpest player who ever joined us at the table. And that was Denny O'Neill's wife, Mary Frances. She was just the sweetest, kindest, most, wonderful woman, and smiling all the time, just the most pleasant person. But you get her at a table with a with a hand of cards, and she'd murder you. And she did it all being very nice and sweet and adorable. But but she won pot after pot. I think she sat in with us twice and cleaned us out every single time. And she had this great like she was surprised she had done it. I didn't buy it for a minute. I told her that. I didn't buy it for a minute. You fleeced us. You knew what you were doing every second. My guess is she was just a better card player than we were. She was very good at bluffing. Her poker face was basically, um, her usual resting face of just a very pleasant person, which took us all in. You know, uh, it was a, I've watched. I used to watch quite a bit of the poker playing, Texas Hold'em poker playing on TV before the a-holes took over. When you actually saw skilled players, and Mary Fran would have done well there because those people knew how to hide everything. And Mary Fran was excellent. Her smiling mask of friendliness hid an absolutely ruthless card player. So there you go. That's real inside baseball. Okay, RB Probst. A question for an upcoming Ask Chuck. Do you have plans to return to the world of Gomers with another book or two? There seem to be several plot points in the first book you set up to address in the future, and they've got me intrigued. Gomers is my zombie novel. I wrote it to get a zombie novel out of my system. I had so many survivalist fantasies. I think that's part of the fun of a zombie apocalypse story is to imagine yourself, what would I do in that situation? And I had so many of those ideas, so many scenarios in my head that I previously had to write this novel. I wrote with another writer because it was another writer's idea to write a sequel. I wrote with another writer quite a bit of a sequel, but I'm frankly not entirely happy with it. And I never got back to it. I got busy, and I really should get back to that and figure out what it is I wasn't happy about in that version, and do another novel. But um, I'm not sure that it's not gilding the lily because this is the one I wanted to write. But I'm going to take another look at the sequel, the sequel draft, and maybe see what it is that I didn't thrill me about it, and jump back on it. Maybe I'll find a way back into it, as we writers often say when we're completely at a loss. Okay, Jack. I have two questions. Do you or your name ever get recognized anywhere in public? What are people's reactions at parties when you tell them you are a comic book writer? Yeah, comic book writing people say you're famous. Yeah, it's a very weird brand of fame because most people don't know who the hell I am. But, you know, but comic book people do, and Gary Quapis, my good buddy Gary Quapis, always says, if your garbage man doesn't know what you do for a living, you're not famous. And I think that's a great guideline. And I'm sure my trash man has no idea that I, wrote Batman comics or cares. So, you're not, comic book people don't get that kind of adulation. Um, you know, I mean, the most famous comic book creator of all time is and always will be Stan Lee. He's a household name. Everybody thinks Stan Lee wrote and drew every comic because, average people don't know a whole lot about comic books and they don't care and they're not aware about creators. But of course, Stan, because he was in all the movies and so many appearances, and over time his name just entered pop culture, and quite rightfully so. I mean, he marketed comics. He was an ambassador for comics. It's only right that he be the most famous comic book creator. He certainly worked hard at becoming the most famous comic book creator. And but everyone else is like, who's that? I think the only other person in the world of cartooning or sequential art that people know the name of would be Charles Schulz. So, but things kind of changed for us lowly, unrecognized, anonymous comic creators when Wizard magazine came along, because Wizard would print articles about comic book creators and they would post their photographs. So people got to know what we looked like. And really, over time, Wizard became the Tiger Beat of comics, because they would rank us by popularity and who was the hottest writer, who was the hottest artist. And of course, all of this was arbitrary. There was a month in which I wrote 6 of the top 10 books on Diamond's 100 list, and I was not considered a hot writer by Wizard. I think I made the hottest writer list maybe 3 times the entire run of the magazine, even though I consistently sold, sometimes in the millions of copies on some books. But yeah, it's a weird kind of fame, and it comes in handy now and then. I remember once I was visiting Reading, Pennsylvania, not Reading, Pennsylvania. I was up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, on some business, and I walked into a comic shop. I'd never been to Scranton before, so I never walked into this comic shop before. I walked in, and the owner was eating a sandwich when I walked in the middle of a weekday. And when he saw me walk through the door, he actually spit his sandwich out. He spit out a mouthful of sandwich onto the counter in shock, because he knew what I looked like. He knew who I was when I walked in. And that was weird. That was very, very weird. Another time, my sister worked at an insurance company, and she was at some sort of work seminar or workshop or some shared event where they had to do team building and all that stuff. And they were going around the table introducing themselves. And one of the guys there, some insurance guy, said that his hobby was collecting comic books. My sister said, "Well, my brother writes comic books." And the guy got all snooty, like, "Oh, would it be anything I ever heard of?" When she said my name, she said she was rewarded with him like going pale and then going apologetic. I can't get used to that idea that someone would be that in awe of me, because I just sit in a room and make stuff up, as I said. But I kind of understand it because I've worked with a lot of artists and worked with a lot of writers that I've absolutely idolized from the time in some cases from the time when I was very small, when I was a little kid, and looked up to these artists and writers. And then I got to work with them, as an equal, as a peer. And a lot of times, I just geek out. I couldn't believe it. So I guess, I kind of understand it. And I don't know if I even like it. I didn't get into this business to be famous. If anything else, people would ask me, why do you want to be in comics, or what's your ultimate goal in comics? And I would always say the respect of my peers. If I could work with some really terrific talent and they would view me as an equal, that was the biggest reward for me. And actually, it's secondary to getting paid to make stuff up. That's really the biggest reward. Okay, I promised an extra, and this is it. someone in an earlier video asked about my favorite authors, and I gave a few Western authors. I have a lot of favorite authors, but I said I would get back to this and visit, you know, uh, some of my favorite writers, and this would be the first. George MacDonald Fraser, standing in front of a basel somewhere in the Highlands of Scotland. Um, Fraser is most famous for his series of novels about Harry Flashman. Harry Flashman is a rogue and a womanizer and a coward. And Fraser wrote, uh, Fraser wrote a lot of novels, but the bulk of his bibliography are novels about Flashmen fighting in various Victorian wars, from the United States to Africa to Asia and Afghanistan, and it's all rousing stuff. But Fraser did not create Harry Flashman. Harry Flashman is actually the villain in a classic novel, English novel, Tom Brown's School Days, about Tom Brown at rugby school, which I think was supposed to be a stand-in for Eton. And he's harassed and bullied and by the Harry Flashman, a roister and bully, just a nasty, nasty guy, womanizer and creep. And Fraser had the absolutely brilliant idea of turning, basically continuing the adventures of Harry Flashman into the future through the Victorian age. What would have become of him? And most of the stories deal with his military career as a guy who will run away rather than fight. Fraser wrote action brilliantly. He wrote battle scenes brilliantly, and he came at it in an honest way, because he fought. Well, he was an officer in a Highland unit, Scots Highlander unit, that fought in Burma against the Japanese. They fought in the jungles of Southeast Asia against Japanese. This is desperate fighting. And Fraser wrote a book called Quarter Safe Out Here about his own experiences fighting with this unit. And it's one of the finest combat memoirs you will ever read. It is as brutally honest, brutally frank, as all of MacDonald Fraser's work was. He spares no one, not himself or his officers or anyone. And it's a tremendous portrayal of men at war, and a tremendous portrayal of combat, horrifying combat in the jungles of Southeast Asia. And Fraser brings that honesty to his fiction. The Flashman books, the one on the left, Flashman at the Charge, is a book I reread once a year. I love this book. It's about Flashman at the charge of the Light Brigade and his adventures being taken prisoner by the Russians to finally escape and aid a bunch of nomadic tribes in preventing the invasion of India by the Russians. It's an amazing, amazing book. It's funny. Some parts of it are horrifying, suspenseful, and it's filled with historical references. MacDonald Fraser was a historian as well as a fiction writer, and one of the things he brings to these Flashman books is a real sense of the time period. He never tries to modernize Flashman. Flashman is he's a pig. He's a racist. As I said, he's a womanizer. He's a coward. He's a dandy. He's prideful. He's deceitful. And because you're seeing these books through the eyes of a rogue, it makes everything seem so much more believable. Because, we all read about the stalwart hero, the fearless, iconic, good guy. And yeah, that's all well and good. But when you really want to see the world honestly, when you want to see it as it was, it's better to see it through the eyes of someone who is not the best of us, who has tons of flaws and isn't afraid to admit to them. Flashman he's unapologetically a coward. He's looking out for number one, and he's never ashamed to tell you that. He never tries to in these memoirs, and they're written as memoirs, they're first-person memoirs. He never tries to hide who he is. And because of that, the events in the stories seem all the more believable because he's being so honest about himself. And he is a man of his time period. As I said, he's a racist. He's a sexist pig. Uh, and Fraser never backs down from that. He portrays him as that, as a man of his time period and in his time period. There's nothing about the moderate age foisted upon these stories to make them more palatable for the sensitive. These stories are like a time machine for me. Just brilliantly written. As I said, brilliantly paced, highly entertaining. Fraser's other big claim to fame is he wrote the screenplays for Richard Lester's two-film adaptation of The Three Musketeers from the 1970s. And it is a terrific distillation of Dumas' novel. And, with all of the trademarks of a Fraser story, lots of humor and action, fast pace, and, clearly delineated characters who are people of their time. So there you go. George MacDonald Fraser. If you like great writing and you like great escapist fiction with a character that is unforgettable, you need to check them out. A little favor to ask: if you like this video, share it. Share it on social media or email, or just tell a friend. If you're like me, a lot of people who with an interest in comics and pop culture and everything else that might like to hear what a creator has to say about it. There might be people that enjoy my little trips into memory lane for lots of juicy comic book trivia. And if there is, let them know. They'd probably appreciate it. And it also would help build the subscription list and audience for this channel and make it worth my time. As much as I enjoy it, it does take time away from writing. But the more people I can get to watch, if I feel like I'm reaching a large enough audience, I'll keep doing these till the wheels come off, people. Anyway, that's it for me. I hope you had a great holiday. I hope you're enjoying Boxing Day. And I will see you all down the road.